Welcome to the Model Health Show. This is fitness and nutrition expert Shawn Stevenson here with my amazing co-host and the producer of the Model Health Show, Jade Harrell. What's up, Jade?
What's up, Shawn?
How are you today?
Today I am fantastic.
Fantastic.
Yes.
All right, that sounds like something Daffy Duck might say.
There we go.
Fantastic. So what does fantastic mean?
It is fantastic and terrific.
Okay, I like it.
Terrifically fantastic.
He blended that. Connections.
Thank
Connections.
you.
I like it.
Yes.
Well, everybody, thank you so much for tuning into the show today. We've got an absolutely incredible guest for you guys. And we're going to talk about something that I know personally, firsthand experience, and also seeing this with thousands of patients over the years and talking about this, sharing with hundreds of thousands of people the importance. But this person has really created I'd say the best work that I've seen thus far on helping to educate the public about this and really transform lives. So I'm very, very excited about this. Before we bring her on, though, let's give a special shout out.
Let's do that.
Let's give a special shout out to my green smoothie today.
A two, a 1, 2, 3, and?
Generally, I'm more of a sit-down breakfast kind of guy, right?
Yes.
And today was on the go. They had a lot going on. Sleep Smarter book, audio book just came out. Had to let the people know. Had to get the word out.
Wonderful. Yes. It's good. You sound good on audiobook, by the way.
Thank you.
I mean,
I feel very
get
distinguished.
You, yeah. I mean, I get you on podcasts. And I'm like, ooh, good. And people are all like, ooh, audio velvet, but on the audio
Velvet?
Velvet. What is that? Velvet?
Listen.
But you sound great.
Before I got the word out myself and I just went over to Audible and checked it out, all these people already reviewed it that don't know anything about me, and just them commenting and saying they love my voice, the personality in the book. That meant a lot, And so everybody, if you haven't checked out the audiobook for Sleep Smarter, definitely head over and do so. But anyways, since I was on the go, I had to make a green smoothie today.
Got it.
Which I generally make for my kids. So today.
You make a good one, too.
I do.
I remember that was one of the first
things. I put my
things.
foot in it.
Right.
Why would somebody do that, though,
good, right?
actually? So, hemp force protein.
Yeah.
All right, that's the kind of hallmark thing in there. So, of course, we've got the greens in there. Of course, we've got the berries, but that hemp force protein. Hemp is quite possibly the most bioavailable form of protein for the human body. Edestin?
Yep.
What do you know about edestin?
I know it's good.
Albumin, soft globular protein. This is why people consume egg whites, which I don't know why you would do that.
You do. They're trying.
I used to do that.
I used to do that. You're not foreign to it.
My egg white. Can I get the egg white omelet? All right, no fat. No fat. Silly humans.
Yeah.
So hemp force protein, and it tastes amazing. I promise you. And we've heard so many stories too. People go to the store like, I heard about hemp protein. They go and get company X hemp protein. It's like, why did you just have me put ashtray ashes into my smoothie, mess the whole thing up?
Right.
That's what the problem is. So
it's
hemp
bad.
force protein tastes amazing.
It's so good.
Choco maca flavor.
That's my favorite.
We've also, today I had the vanilla acai, which was fantastic.
I know you
so
jazzed
check out
it
the
up.
hemp force protein. That's what I use. I love that as my pre-workout. Also, my pre-workout is Shroom Tech Sport
for sure.
based on cordyceps mushroom. If you're not doing so already, head over, check them out. Onnit.com, ONNIT.com/model for 10% off all of your health and human performance supplements. Now, let's get to the iTunes review of the week.
All right. This is a great one, too. It's from Amy, the esthetician. Just a little note, 5 stars. Deep breath. Where do I start? My life's path is going to be brighter because of the Model Health Show. I didn't realize how thirsty I was for all of these truths until I heard the podcast for the first time. The funny thing is, for the life of me, I cannot remember how I started listening. I think it might have been God sent. As if Shawn and Jade were not enough, don't even get me started on these guest speakers, from Bob Proctor to Dr. Jillian to Mike Dolce. Incredible. These episodes are on repeat. I pick up something new and life-changing every single time. Shawn, your dedication to help the world through knowledge and empowerment inspires me to do the same. Thank you for reminding me to wake up daily with the goal to serve others. I'm a skincare therapist, aka esthetician. I haven't yet tapped into my niche yet in the field, but I am close. I can literally feel it. I can honestly say that this show has helped me to wake up and see the true potential I have inside. The show has also helped me realize how much love I have to give. I think I tried to suppress it for a while as I was trying to fit in serving others. Thank you for the tools that are helping me along my journey. I would have never known that hormones are in charge of my energy, mental health, and weight. What? And I have the resources to balance them on my own. Where else would I have learned that? How to starve cancer and even prevent it by eating a plant-based diet. reminding me that life struggles as opportunities and the importance of anti-inflammatories, and the importance of anti-inflammatories. I could go on and on. You and Jade make smart sexy, and your overall love and desire to help restore my faith in society has helped change the world.
Wow. I'm over here cheesing like a child. Like my cheeks hurt. Thank you so much. There's so much there. It's so rich.
Yeah.
So grateful for that. Making smart sexy. Where's the t-shirts? Let's do this. All right. That's what we're all about. So thank you so much for leaving that review for us. And everybody, thanks for leaving those reviews on iTunes. Keep them coming. Now to our special guest. All right. Today we have on the author of the Microbiome Solution and several other books, Dr. Robyn Chutkan. And guess what? She's the author of the best-selling digestive health books, Gut Bliss, The Microbiome Solution, and The Bloat Cure, which I have them all. Mm-hmm. She received her bachelor's degree from Yale University and her medical degree from Columbia College of Physicians and Surgeons in New York, where she also did her internship and residency and served as chief resident. She completed her fellowship in gastroenterology at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. Dr. Chutkan has been on the faculty at Georgetown University Hospital since 1997. When I graduated from high school, she was killing it already.
Out of high school.
In 2004, she founded the Digestive Center for Women, an integrative gastroenterology practice incorporating nutritional optimization, exercise physiology, biofeedback, and stress reduction as part of the therapeutic approach to digestive disorders. Mm-hmm. In the last few years, she has focused exclusively on diagnosing and treating microbial discord in the gut and created the Microbiome Institute to facilitate better patient access to microbiome education, testing, and treatment. Dr. Chutkan is a regular guest on the Dr. Oz Show covering digestive health and is also a member of the medical advisory board for the show. She's been featured as an expert on the Today Show, CBS This Morning, and The Doctors, and she's also an avid marathon runner. I also saw snowboarder.
Oh, see?
All right, shout out to the X Games. And yoga practitioner, and is passionate about helping her patients live not just longer, but better lives. And I'd like to welcome to the Model Health Show, Dr. Robyn Chutkan. How you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me, Shawn and Jade. Really a pleasure to be with you today.
I'm so excited to have you on. So first and foremost, I know quite a bit about you, of course, by reading your books, but I would love to know more of your backstory. All right, what did you grow up with an interest in health? What got you interested in the first place in getting into this field?
Shawn, I'm from Jamaica originally, and my dad is from India. So I grew up with a Jamaican mom and an Indian dad in Jamaica till I was about 13. My grandfather, my dad's father, was a sugarcane farmer. He actually came from India to Jamaica as an indentured laborer around the turn of the century and worked on a sugarcane plantation and then eventually built up and had his own farm. So we grew up spending a lot of time on the farm. And they grew a lot of the food. They grew sugarcane, but my dad's family is Hindu. They didn't eat beef or pork, so he raised geese and chickens. He was into a little bit of fish farming. He had a lot of goats. There were a lot of animals around, and we grew up basically running around barefoot on the farm, swimming in the river, eating food that wasn't called organic then, as you know, but it was, by definition, it was all sort of locally grown by my grandfather without any pesticides and things like that. And it was, the chickens fertilized the crops, and then they used the fish droppings for different things. So it was sort of the ultimate sustainable farming back then. And my dad, who's an orthopedic surgeon, was deathly afraid that we would grow up to be hypochondriacs. So his way of sort of handling that was to basically ignore any kind of illness. So if we were sick, he'd kind of say, nobody's really interested. Why don't you go to your room and lie down? You'll feel better in the morning. So he did not encourage us to be ill at all. In fact, I remember one day stepping on a nail and having like a bloody foot. And he was like, yeah, I think you'll be fine. Just go to your room and lie down. And I think my tetanus shot was up to date, so I was okay. But it was, I like to call it a little bit of benign neglect, which, there's something to be said for that, quite frankly, in this day and age. And we spent a lot of time outdoors and, as I said, roaming around barefoot. And so we were rewilding before we even knew what that was, or wilding, perhaps, shall we say. We were getting exposed to lots of healthy microbes in an environment that really was very different from the environment my 11-year-old roams around now in Washington, D.C. And I'm really grateful to my parents for giving me that bit of a dirty childhood. Yeah. But to sort of get back to my inspiration for medicine, My dad's a surgeon. My brother's a surgeon. They're both orthopedic surgeons. I thought for sure I'm going into the family business. But within about 7 or 8 minutes of my orthopedics rotation in medical school, I realized that this was not for me. There was a lot of carpentry involved. Not that I don't like carpentry. I'm sort of more into metal work myself. But I really did not. It was not appealing to me. And so I ended up looking around and saying, what else do I like? I like general surgery, but outside of the operating room, there's not a lot going on. I'm not sure this is for me. And so it was sort of a process of elimination. I think that's how a lot of us end up on our career paths. And I really enjoyed gastroenterology. I enjoyed the procedures. I like the fact that we were dealing with people with a wide range of different things wrong with them. And what's really interesting is I made that decision a long time ago in medical school, but over the last decade or so, the gut is really where it's at in a lot of ways. I mean, every specialist thinks their organ is the most important. The neurologist thinks it's a brain, the cardiologist thinks it's a heart. But I'm here to tell you, it's the gut. It really is your engine. And now we're seeing that so many diseases emanate from the gut. And, Hippocrates figured it out a long time ago, a couple thousand years ago. He said all disease begins in the gut. But it's really gratifying to me as a gastroenterologist, really feeling that in terms of the way people are looking at illness and understanding root cause of illness. So it's sort of a good time to be in gastroenterology, but that's a long story for how I got here.
No, this is so
story.
true. And, this is the seminal work here of this moment, and you making that decision back in the day, it puts you in a position, thankfully, to be the voice for this. I'm so surprised that I hadn't heard about or connected with you sooner. Once I found out about you, it blew my mind. Literally this book. So we've got here in my hand, the Microbiome Solution. And definitely everybody, this is an absolute must read. And it's, like I said, it's absolutely fascinating. So here's the thing. I might as well just dip the book into like highlighter fluid because there's so much good stuff in here and just making it make sense for people. So, of course, our audience, we like to know stuff. We like to geek out. We like to know the science, but we also like that practicality. And you blended it so well together. And so let's start at the top, the Microbiome Solution. What exactly is this microbiome?
The microbiome refers to all the organisms, mostly bacteria, but it turns out a lot of viruses, fungal organisms, worms, all the microscopic organisms that live in and on the human body. And it's about 100 trillion in all. So it's a lot. And even though they're microscopic, if you took, for example, all the bacteria in the gut and you scraped it all up, it would weigh around 3 or 4 pounds. So even though these organisms are really small, there are a lot of them. There are more than 1 billion microbes in just one drop of fluid from your colon alone. So we're talking about a lot of organisms here. And what's really unique and fascinating about the microbiome is that a decade, 2 decades ago, we thought that microbes were germs and bad and that we should spend most of our time eliminating them. We thought they caused disease. And now we're realizing that our microbes are really essential for good health and that our health is really intimately entwined with their health. And really, you're only as healthy as your microbes. So it's a completely new paradigm in medicine and healthcare and how we view human health and really understanding that these organisms that we thought were responsible for illness, now, of course, some of them still are, but that the majority of them, the overwhelming majority, are really involved in keeping us healthy. So that's been a really sort of exciting shift in the way we think about disease and illness.
Yeah.
It's almost like discovering a whole new land and world,
Right. It's so
Jay,
interesting.
that's so true.
Yeah.
It's like a new planet. That's how I feel.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel a bit like an astronaut, and we're off in search of new landscapes.
That's right.
The
so
final
excited.
frontier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or is it?
It's right. Okay. Thanks for freaking us out,
It's so
Jay.
interesting that actually, Jay, that you say that because an article that just came out this week in one of the major medical journals has now identified that there are probably more viruses than there are even bacteria. And that viruses are things that have gotten a bad rap, right? I mean, viruses, herpes and the flu and things like that. But it turns out that these viruses are also an important part of training our microbes what to respond to and what to ignore. So they're also keeping us healthy. And that's even, sort of more cutting edge than thinking of bacteria as being helpful.
That's
Yeah,
right.
and
A
you
whole
mentioned
other area.
how over the years we've had this war against microbes and bacteria, and what's so crazy, and we've mentioned this several times, we have more bacteria than we have human cells. So it's kind of this self-destructive
Yes.
concept of reality, and I think that kind of, there's a lot of meaning there. It's like a metaphysical explanation for this too, and kind of how we've lost touch with reality and ourselves, and we've been hurting each other and hurting ourselves. And I think that this is a big part of getting back connected to what's real and important about us. And this starts early on. So if you could walk us through, how does our microbiome actually develop from being in the womb to the time when we clock out? How does this whole thing develop?
So we used to think that the fetus was sterile, and it turns out that even the fetus probably has some early microbes. But for the most part, we acquire most of our microbes at birth. And that initial moment of passing out through the birth canal is one of the most important points in our life, actually, because that's when the founding species of microbes develop. And there is a huge difference between babies who are born vaginally and actually pass through the birth canal versus babies born via C-section. So if you've ever seen a birth actually live, or a YouTube birth, which can sometimes be as good as a real thing, what you notice is that as a baby's head crowns, it turns posteriorly to face the mother's tush. So why does it turn like that? It turns so that the baby can swallow a mouthful of microbes from, probably the dirtiest part of the body, right? The rear end, and get colonized with those founding species. And when we compare babies born vaginally with babies born via C-section, we see that the babies born vaginally are colonized primarily with the mother's microbe, with bifidobacteria and lactobacillus and these healthy founding species. Babies born via C-section are colonized mostly with hospital-acquired staph. And so it's not just a difference of, well, you have these bugs and I have these bugs, and maybe your bugs are better than mine. We see increased rates of asthma, allergies, autoimmune disease, even obesity in babies born via C-section versus babies born vaginally. And this is a real concern, because somewhere around 1 in 3 to 1 in 4 babies born in the US are now born via C-section. And while some of those are medically necessary, we think that a huge number are not. It's based on convenience and cost and all kinds of other factors. And I think most people, and actually most physicians, are unaware of this incredible difference that can really haunt you for many decades to come, the difference between a vaginal birth and a C-section birth. We're aware of the complications. We know that a C-section is surgery and that there are complications of infection and blood clots and so on. But I know when I had my daughter 11 years ago, I was completely unaware that there was actually this very significant difference in the microbiome, and this medical difference that could really have a meaningful effect on her health. So I think it's so important for people to know those basic things. And, unfortunately, there's a tendency in medicine when we don't know something, we think it's not important. We're like, I didn't know that, so it can't be important. It can't be relevant. And we're just seeing now this kind of shift in the medical world. I wrote a birth plan in the book that talks about drugs and different cleaning solutions and things like that to try and avoid using on your newborn baby. Just as they've acquired all these important microbes, the last thing you want is to have them all removed, and the importance of avoiding antibiotics during pregnancy and so on. And my OBGYN colleagues are up in arms. I'm like on their total, hate list, because they're like, this is so annoying. The patients come in and now they, want all this natural stuff. And they're really kind of pissed off about it. So hopefully the message will start to trickle down that this stuff is actually really important. And this isn't just, hippie patients wanting to do things naturally, that these things have really serious implications for the health of our babies.
Yeah,
sure.
I want to come back.
Mad.
Yeah, I want to come back to this. 4 for 4.
Yeah, and unfortunately,
at the free throw line.
I know, right? For the C-section line,
I'm for
you. Well, but that wasn't, after the first. Then they tell you there's no turning back, that once you've already had a C-section, then the others had to follow. So then you really wrote the future out for my children. And when she says founding species, that's huge. The founding members of your child's future that set the tone for all the rest, that happens then. And then it's predetermined by whatever the first reason happened. That's incredible that you're doing this. Let them get mad. Let's save the youngins.
What's so fascinating is, I liken it to getting that download, that initial download, formatting disk for your immune system, with this whole experience. And so you've already mentioned quite a few things that we've touched on in the past, but the rates of cesarean section with, we're treating now birth
Right.
like it's an opportunity, like it's a problem, like it's an opportunity for surgery.
Yeah, like it's a medical disease, and well, it's an opportunity to make a ton of money, quite frankly, and that's part of the real problem in our health system is, number one, the medicalization of everything. Like, you sneezed, oh, you've got a disease. Here, I have a pharmaceutical fix for you and 5 tests to do. So it's a medicalization of everything, and it is all the commerce involved. I mean, having babies is a huge booming business. And while I'm all for having hospitals and C-sections and fancy drugs available, the problem is that this stuff is being applied indiscriminately. And people, I mean, I personally, when I had my daughter, and it was sort of a long saga of her ending up in the neonatal ICU, even though she was fine, it was done preventively because I had the flu and I had a fever. And at the time, 11 years ago, I kind of hadn't had my aha moment, if you will. I thought, oh, this is great. They're being so proactive. I was still in the mindset that more equal better.
Yeah.
Sort of more tests, more procedures, more medications, that somehow that meant a better outcome. And it took me a long time to realize that not only was that not the case, but perhaps it was inversely proportional in some important ways.
Yeah. Let me share a quick example. And this is a real example from my life. So my wife and her friend were actually pregnant at the same time. My wife was a little bit further along, but they told my wife's friend, her physicians told her, and this was when she was maybe, say 6 months pregnant, that she was too small and that they were going to schedule a C-section for her. Or maybe it was when she was 7 months. I don't know exactly when, but this is what she told her. And they said, and here's the crazy part. My wife is smaller than her, and she told this to her friend, right? And so they scheduled this cesarean section, and she had no idea about any of this stuff. And this is what it really boils down to, is getting educated, finding out about how this stuff works. Especially with this, we're bringing humans into the world. We absolutely need to make this a must to learn more about it. And so there's another part of this process with this kind of inoculation and then the development of the microbiome outside of the birthing process. So now we move into breastfeeding. So let's talk a little bit about that.
One of the commonest ingredients in breast milk, in fact, it's the third most common ingredient, is something called the HMO, and that stands for human milk oligosaccharides. And the fascinating thing about HMOs is they are completely indigestible by babies. So why would the third most common ingredient in breast milk be something that a baby can't digest? It's because it's not there to feed the baby, it's there to feed the baby's microbes. So human milk oligosaccharides are food for the baby's burgeoning microbiome. And so again, you're a C-section baby, and then maybe you miss out on breastfeeding and you're getting formula instead. Now your microbes aren't getting that vital food they need to multiply. So it's kind of a double whammy. And that was actually the situation my daughter ended up in when my breast milk dried up after about 6 weeks. But I had no idea. I didn't know what an HMO was. And I went to med school. I was a practicing physician for over 20 years. I had no idea. I had no idea that the soy formula that the pediatrician recommended had the equivalent of about 5 birth control pills in it. No idea. And again, physicians, for the most part, they want good outcomes for their patients. They care about people. They care about people's health, but they're misinformed. And again, there's this tendency, if, I didn't learn it in medical school, or it's not coming from one of my medical journals, and it must not be important. And so it's just an incredible travesty that people don't have this information. And there are times when women can't breastfeed and formula can be, life-saving, and that's great. But suggesting that formula is somehow equivalent to breast milk, or a good idea, or, an easy second choice, is really problematic. And this is, again, where I think so many people within the healthcare profession lack the information. I mean, I use myself as an example. I knew nothing about this, but I just there's this assumption that, well, millions of women do it, so it must be okay, without really having any sense of what I was doing to my child and to her microbiome. So another great example. And, we have this almost bias against people who really push breastfeeding sometimes, like the whole La Leche League. And we're like, oh, these women are, they're so dramatic about the breastfeeding. I mean, I was one of those physicians kind of rolling my eyes and thinking, okay, breastfeeding is more natural, so it's probably better. But is there
a
really
big
this
deal.
big difference? Well, it turns out there really is this big difference. And a lot of it has to do with ingredients like HMOs and other, even as yet undiscovered ingredients in breast milk that are there for specific purposes.
Sure. I have a question then. Is it specific to your individual child? So though I did have C-section after C-section, I made plenty of milk, so much so that I was contributing milk to children that had been adopted or foster children that didn't have a source.
Wow. I didn't know that.
You didn't know that? Oh, I was making milk for everybody.
Yeah.
That's incredible. That is one of the most philanthropic things you can do, because it's not specific just to your child. And that concept of a milk bank, or in your case, milk charity.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're feeling bad about your C-sections for your kids, you should feel really good about the health promoting benefits that you've given these babies through your breast milk. That's incredible.
Awesome. Thank you. I do feel amazing about that.
Let's move on to infancy and childhood, especially when they're small. Like, the kids are always putting their fingers in their mouth and things
and
like
everywhere
that.
else.
And so let's talk a little bit about that, because a lot of people let's put some what is that
hand
stuff?
sanitizer.
On their hands.
We are super sanitizing ourselves into some real illness. So dirt over chemicals any day of the week for sure. But again, we have this idea that more is better when it comes to medical intervention. We have this idea that cleaner is healthier. And again, turns out not only is that not the case, but perhaps there's an inverse relationship. The microbiome by about age 3 or 4 starts to resemble the adult microbiome. It's pretty formed by about that age, which is why it's so important for any parents out there with young children to really use antibiotics judiciously or not at all, because we'll get to the antibiotic point, I'm sure, somewhere along the show. But the really important fact I want to give now is that 5 days of a broad spectrum antibiotic of the kind you might use for a sinus infection or something will knock out a third of your microbiome, and there's no guarantee it's ever coming back. So when we're talking about young children where the microbiome is just forming, using antibiotics for these ear infections and colds and sore throats that are almost always viral and self-limited is a particularly bad idea, because what we're doing is we're setting our kids up for serious illness later on. It's sort of pay now or pay later. Pay now, be sick and really kind of inconvenience everybody, or pay later when you end up with some crazy autoimmune disease that you had no idea you were contributing to with all these antibiotics. So by about 3, the microbiome is pretty stable. And Shawn, what you pointed out about kids putting stuff in their mouth and playing and exploring with their mouth and their fingers, there's a reason why they do that. Animals do the same thing, which of course we are also animals. I mean, if you see puppies and dogs and so on, that's what they do. They sniff and they lick and they smell. And that's exactly what we're supposed to do. Now, it's a good idea to make sure that they're not dangerous, kind of poisonous, really problematic things in our child's immediate neighborhood as they explore. But having them pick stuff off the floor, and that's how they're acquiring microbes. They're doing it for a reason. And their microbiome up till about that age mostly resembles a mother's and siblings. And we can tell, for example, whether a kid has a dog at home or not based on looking at the microbiome and looking at the different species that we see. Having a lot of siblings is actually a good thing, because you kind of get immunized and you're also acquiring microbes from your siblings. So being part of a large clan is good. And that's why, being sort of communal and raising kids around lots of other kids is actually a really great idea.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. In the book, you also cite studies, like long-term studies, looking at health of individuals long-term after being exposed in a household where there's more kids, and also whether or not they were breastfed, things like that. And you actually see this stuff show up later in life with higher levels of things like autoimmune disease, things like that. And another thing you talk about as a society is the fact that we are unwilding ourselves. I heard you say wilding earlier. We're unwilding ourselves. And so one of the things that we are commonly exposed to, which we've touched on, is this antibacterial hand sanitizer and antibacterial soaps.
They even say antimicrobial on some.
And also antibiotics themselves. And by the way, I'm just going to say this again. Anti means against, biotic means life. Yes. Right there. It says in the word. And literally right before this show, right before we dialed you up, I got a call. It was my niece, and she has this swelling on her face. There's a bump. And it doesn't look too good. And so the doctor, of course, is prescribing some antibiotics. He said, if this doesn't go down in a day, use an antibiotic. What on what grounds? On what grounds?
And what
There's
goes
no
down
testing
in a
done.
day?
Yeah. So it's just
again, I
Right.
think it's there are two things. Number one, it is this magical thinking that you can use drugs and they don't have side effects, and they don't have consequences. And that's magical thinking. But when we consider that so much of our medical education is funded and supported by the pharmaceutical industry, and that's quite frankly who's educating us, it's not surprising that as physicians, we would think that you could just use these potent drugs and somehow there would be no fallout from that. So number one, people are really sort of misinformed, misguided, and miseducated about how dangerous many of these drugs are, number one. And number two, expectations. And this is where we as consumers of healthcare have to actually take some of the responsibility. We don't want to suffer. We don't want to be sick. We don't want to have a bump on our face. And we are kind of unwilling to put up with stuff. We are unwilling to put up with a cough and a cold and a fever and being sick and feeling bad. And we have been led to believe that we never have to suffer that way, that we never have to be sick. And that's also magical thinking. So I think it's a combination of factors that has gotten us into this place. Number one, again, on the part of the healthcare community, not realizing the downside of these pharmaceutical agents, and as consumers, having expectations that are quite frankly a little bit unrealistic. And I think the biggest issue is not asking this question, why? So we're really good at asking what, and we're really good as physicians at answering that question of what. Like, what is this? It's a boil, it's Crohn's disease, it's dengue fever. But why? Why do you have Crohn's disease? Why do you have a boil on your face? Why did you get dengue fever? And not accepting that disease just falls out of the sky into our laps. Occasionally disease falls out of the sky into our laps, but more often than not, when you trace things back, it's this whole series of events. It's like that series that my daughter loved, A Series of Unfortunate Events.
Love that movie.
Starting with things like the circumstances of our birth, the food that we ate, the environment that we lived in, the practices and medications that we took. And really, Shawn and Jade, my real inspiration for writing this book, number one, I just thought this was incredibly valuable information, a lot of which I didn't know. And I'm like, okay, I'm a physician. I trained at pretty good places. I don't know this. I think the average person might not know this, but also recognizing some of these trends. My area of expertise is inflammatory bowel diseases, Crohn's disease, and ulcerative colitis. I started seeing all these young patients coming in with inflammatory bowel disease, and they all had this common historical thread of having been on a lot of antibiotics at a young age, and sometimes being picky eaters too, because that's a contributing factor there, the diet. So, we think of these diseases as genetic, but they're not really genetic. They're familial. And only about 20 to 25% of people with autoimmune diseases like Crohn's have a family history. And even when they do, and even when we can identify the genes that carry the trait, it is really an environmental trigger that causes a disease to actually develop. And we know that the environmental trigger for many of these autoimmune diseases is damage to the microbiome, this sort of microbial disarray. So understanding that, kind of looking at this and seeing there is a way to potentially prevent these diseases from developing, even in people who have the genetic susceptibility. There was a meta-analysis where they took many, many different studies and sort of combined them in one big summary study from my alma mater, Mount Sinai, in New York, where Dr. Crohn actually first described the disease in the 1930s. And they looked at over 7,000 patients, mostly kids with inflammatory bowel disease. And they found that taking antibiotics was the main risk factor for developing the disease. And what's really frightening about that is even now, people use antibiotics to treat those diseases. So when people have flare-ups of Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, gastroenterologists often treat that with antibiotics, the same antibiotics that are actually responsible for causing those diseases. I mean, that is just incredible that that's still going on. So I felt like, people have to know this and have to understand that most of the time, disease is not something that falls out of the sky into your laps. Most of the time, you can actually connect the dots and see where this developed. And unfortunately, many of those dots are pharmaceutical dots.
Yeah. Wow. And you're literally speaking to so many people listening our history. And what this really points to is just a simple, very simple understanding for all of us to take away. It's just be more empowered in your life and asking the questions, asking the questions and having the audacity to say no in certain instances as well, So like, my brother ringing me up, and
Right.
also his wife too. She was like, "Hey, brother-in-law," sending me the pictures
Right,
of my
right.
niece and everything, and just
Yeah.
asking other people, asking questions instead of just blindly saying, "Okay, I'll take some antibiotics." There is a place for that. Always, this
Sure.
could be absolutely life-saving in some instances, but we have to
Yes.
get away from just trying to get that instant relief. That's the problem. You just said it. We have this issue with struggle, with pain,
Right.
and sometimes that pain can help to develop a much better version of yourself in minute cases. All right. We're
Sure.
not talking about, if your arm's hanging off, obviously,
Sure. If you
please,
have gangrene, get some antibiotics. for
yes,
sure.
go and get
And if
looked
you have
at.
a cold,
Right,
suffer.
right.
Yeah, like your body knows what to do. So here's the thing. Now, you mentioned a really important word while you were talking just then, which you said genes. And we talk about epigenetics a lot on the show. And what I've been studying for the last 5 years is nutrigenomics and looking at how that influences our genetic expression. And here's the thing. So in your book, you say this. I'm just so excited about this. Gene modulation. We have about 23,000 human genes and 8 million microbial genes. What?
Right.
Microbes
amazing, right?
have genes. So talk about a little bit about this gene modulation. What does that even mean for us?
Well, Shawn, I'm excited to see that you're as excited and geeked out about this as I am, because, in medical school, I learned that our genes are pretty static. You get what you get and you don't get upset. That's kind of how it is. And that the genes somehow, hold your future. Your destiny is all in your genes. So when the Human Genome Project came along, people in medicine were really excited because we were like, okay, this will be the end of all genetic diseases. We're going to cure all these genetic diseases when we're able to unravel the mysteries of the human genome. So Jade, how many genetic diseases do you think have been cured in the several
Wow.
years since we've been able to sequence the entire human genome?
Well, when you think of the major ones and I think that adds to it because we're so scared of something major like that
Well, what's the
happening
number,
again.
though?
But
How
I'd
many?
probably say 50.
0.
Oh my goodness.
0. We have cured
Are you kidding?
0 genetic diseases. We have whole human genome sequencing has been around now for years. We have cured 0 genetic diseses. And that is because disease is a complex mashup of many things.
Here's the thing. Genetics, well, of course, we talked about this many times on the show. Epigenetics is really where to put our focus and understand that our lifestyle, that our exposure, our internal environment and our external environment literally can send signals to your genes to either express themselves or to be dormant. It's just how it works.
Turn on or turn off. And there are also genes that our microbes are able to actually manufacture, that they provide. They're missing genes for things that, our 23,000 and their 8 million that they provide. So it's not just that they can activate and deactivate our genes, they can actually provide missing genetic information. And we see this in identical twin studies all the time with diseases. If a disease is truly genetic, then there should be 100% concordance in identical twins who have the identical genetic matter. If one identical twin has it, the other identical twin should have it.
Right.
And we see that that's not the case for almost every disease, even the ones that we think of as genetic, because of these environmental factors. And a large part of the environmental factors that we're talking about is the differences in the microbiome. And we see it in identical twins where one is lean and one is obese. And we see same genetic material, but really significant microbial differences between the lean and the obese twin.
And so then that goes back to the birthing plan and birthing process, that how can identical twins have such a difference in their microbial microbiome?
Different practices, different diets, one twin might have been on antibiotics for a month for pneumonia. The different food that they've eaten, different illnesses that they've had. One twin might have had viral illness that knocked out a lot of their microbes, might have traveled to different places. So it's really the environmental epigenetic influences.
Yeah, Jay, just because they wear the same outfit doesn't mean that they experience everything. And speaking of twins, speaking of twins, I just this past weekend watched
Arnold
Twins
Schwarzenegger.
with Arnold. They're not identical, obviously. No. Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito. Man, such classic comedy. It's like, you're my brother. What are you doing?
Great movie.
Oh, you're
classic stuff. So, all right, let's talk about dysbiosis. This is something that is very, very, very prevalent in our culture right now. And a lot of people are suffering from things that seem unrelated to this particular issue. You know, for me specifically, I had this issue going on. And for me, it manifested, I didn't have specific symptoms unless I ate certain foods. So I just thought it was a food allergy, you know, and so I just avoided those foods. And so I don't have symptoms and I think that I'm okay. Now, the issue was this dysbiosis. And so please talk about this from your professional experience. What is dysbiosis and how does this happen?
Dysbiosis really refers to microbial discord. It refers to an imbalance within the microbiome where you have overrepresentation of some species and underrepresentation of others. And, you know, they're using this term now, pathobionts, as opposed to pathogen. So a pathogen implies sort of a bad character, right? A bacteria or a virus that shouldn't be there. But what we're finding is this concept of a pathobiont is a commensal, meaning a fairly harmless bacteria or microbe of some kind that under certain circumstances overgrows, becomes overrepresented, and now becomes a threat. Yeah. So it's, you know, we really have to change the way we look at microbes as sort of good versus bad and look at them in a more relative context of should you be here versus, you know, maybe you should be somewhere else and you're somewhere where you shouldn't be, or maybe there are too many of you in the different setting, or maybe in this particular environment, there should be fewer of you than there normally would be. So, for example, when we're talking about yeast, about Candida, which people get very sort of worried about and concerned about, and I remind people, yeast are normal native organisms in our microbiome, and they play an important role. They're involved in digestion and so on, but it's when they grow out of control. So most women who've taken an antibiotic have had the unfortunate experience of experiencing a yeast infection vaginally, and that's an example of dysbiosis. It's not an infection in the sense that you haven't caught yeast from the toilet seat or from your neighbor or from your partner. You have yeast in your body, but they've now proliferated and they're overgrowing because some of the other players have been killed off by the antibiotics. So they're overrepresented. So that's a classic example of dysbiosis, of imbalance. And the way to approach that is not to go on a search and destroy mission for the yeast and to use potent anti-yeast therapy. The way to address that is to rebalance the microbiome by repopulating with a healthy species so that the yeast can kind of get down to their basic level. Because if you treat yeast overgrowth just using antifungals, you'll suppress them. And then as soon as you stop the antifungal, the yeast will spring back up, and you'll suppress it and they'll spring back up. So until you repopulate and you kind of crowd out the yeast, you're not going to solve that problem. And we're realizing that so much of what we see as infection is really imbalance. Mm-hmm. It's not that we should go on this search and destroy mission. It's that we need to repopulate and we need to rebalance and we need to crowd out some of these not so good species. So dysbiosis is kind of everywhere because you think about the environment we live in, all the chlorine in the water and the hand sanitizer everywhere, the pesticides in the food, the antibiotics lurking around every corner. Our microbes are they're in constant threat of being exterminated. And so many of these diseases, I mean, autoimmune diseases are the classic ones that we see are really related to microbial discord. But if you look at the scientific literature, autism, allergies, asthma, obesity, Parkinson's disease, heart disease, certain types of cancer, there's a microbial link for all of these conditions. It's not necessarily the only cause or the root cause for all of them, but as a contributing factor, really seem to play a role. And so it's so important to recognize this. I mean, so many people walking around not feeling well, whether it's leaky gut and they're having skin reactions or brain fog or joint pain, or whether it's a more serious autoimmune disease. Again, joining the dots and figuring out that there's something really wrong is so important, because until you do that, you can't start to heal. Whether it is cleaning out your medicine cabinet, getting rid of the antibiotics and nonsteroidals or hormone replacement therapy, all the different stuff that is potentially creating microbial discord, the birth control pills, whether it's really looking at the food and seeing what foods might be triggering this in somebody who has microbial discord, figuring out the right foods to eat. Until you recognize that there is a problem, you can't really fix it.
I guarantee you guys, Krispy Kremes is not feeding the bacteria that you want to be fed, all right? I guarantee
it's feeding those yeast species.
Yes, they're going ham on that donut, all right? So there's so much amazing substance there in what you just shared. And I have this very visceral feeling right now that this requires some patience. And that's really what I'm hearing you speak, because again, we're very now, I want it now, I'm suffering now, I need something. And we'll take that approach of just throwing a nuclear bomb in there, AKA in the form of an antibiotic. And it doesn't care. It doesn't care who's who. It doesn't care who's doing a good job, who's doing a bad job. It's taking out a lot. Right. It's taking out a lot of people. And with this, it's an approach where we have to, like you said, recolonize and start to build up that healthy balance again. And so, because even things like E. coli, like there's so many things that we all have, and we hear these bad things about them, but we all have them. It's just they're kind of kept in check and they're in balance and they have a purpose, you know. So we have to look at this like I call it a rainforest, you know. And then when I read her book, she said, "Welcome to the jungle." I was like, "We're on the same page."
Right. I was thinking deforestation.
Such an important point that you make, Shawn. Really making the analogy between what's going on internally in our guts and what's going on externally in our environment. And I'm sort of interested in ecology as much as the next person, but I certainly didn't consider myself an expert. But when you look at the deforestation, we've sort of 80% of the forest is gone, 50% of the wild animals, 70% of the fish. The same thing is going on inside our guts, in our microbiome. So we have kind of unwilded our insides the same way we've unwilded our external landscape. And the same circumstances and consequences that we're seeing now with global warming and all these different things, famine, it's happening internally too. And it's really a fascinating paradigm that we're doing the same thing internally to our bodies that we're doing externally to our landscapes. Right. And when you look at species, when the bees disappear, we're really sunk, right? We're all toast when that happens. But you look at what happens when you remove one species from the food chain, even if it's a predator, like you get rid of the wolves. Getting rid of the wolves was not such a good idea, as it turns out. Yeah. And because they all play a role, even the not so good characters, they play a role. There's a reason that all these different species are there. And diversity in the microbiome, just like diversity externally in the world, is one of the most important indicators of a healthy microbiome. And, when we say diversity, we're not just talking about the good species. We're talking about, the viruses, the helminths, all of these different organisms play a role for balance. And it's very much that way externally in the world we live in too.
Well, This is, like you just said, symbolic. And there are so many different amazing insights that we already have here. But we want to talk about solutions. What are some of the things we can do to rebuild this microbiome, to really get back to health from the inside out, from the root? And we're going to do that right after this break. We'll be right back. Hey, everybody. With all of the things that we're exposed to today, the environmental toxicity, the weird stuff showing up in our food supply, we've got to do things to really support our immune system. Our immune system is really running the show on so many different levels to keep us healthy. And one of the most powerful things for supporting a healthy immune system is making sure that we're getting in some immunomodulators. So what does that mean? These are substances that can help to elevate our immune system in response to things that might be trying to creep their way into our body, into our cells, and defend us against those things. But it can also bring the immune system back down, calm it down if things are running too hot, AKA we're dealing with some autoimmunity. We need things that are intelligent. Many drugs out there that are pushed through pharmaceutical companies, though they mean well, they push your immune system in one direction, and that can really mess things up on the back end, leading to AKA side effects. So to avoid that, getting some natural immunoregulators are going to be a powerful thing you add into your life. How I do that, and it's been a consistent basis pretty much every single day for the past 3 months now, I've been using every day, and even had it this morning, the incredible mushroom elixirs from Four Sigmatic. So head over to foursigmatic.com/model. So that's FORSIGMATIC.com/model. And you're going to get 10% off all of these amazing superfood elixirs. My favorite is the chaga. And chaga has been clinically shown to increase your NK cell activity, so your natural killer cells, over 300%. It's also the most powerful antioxidant that we've ever seen in the history of humanity that humans actually consume. Powerful antioxidant, powerful anti-cancer, powerful immune system regulator. So that's what I use in the morning. I'll get some chaga, and sometimes I'll have it straight, or I'll blend it with some, hot water, some healthy fat. So this could be some, ghee. This could be some grass-fed butter. This could be some coconut oil, some MCT oil, things like that. With a little bit of cinnamon, maybe some other fun medicinal herbs you can throw in there. But this has been the daily thing that I've done for the past few months, and I highly recommend you start doing the same thing. They also have the mushroom coffees, and my wife is a big fan of these. And so the mushroom coffee mix has cordyceps and chaga in there. And today she ran out. She was like, where's my coffee? You know, and she's not even, ever since we've been together, she hasn't been a coffee drinker, but this has been her daily thing. She loves the way it makes her feel, and she doesn't get some weird kind of caffeine spike and crash as well. So head over and check them out. 4sigmatic.com/model for 10% off. Now back to the show. Okay, we are back, and we're talking with Dr. Robyn Chutkan, and she is talking about her incredible book, which you must have this book in your hands, The Microbiome Solution. Also, The Bloat Cure and Gut Bliss. Best title ever. That's when I first heard about you, was Gut Bliss. Such a good name. And she's just breaking it down and really changing paradigms right now with these insights about what's going on in our guts and how important this is. But what we want to talk about now is, what are some of the solutions? How can we start to create this natural balance? How can we create this harmony in our bellies again so that we can experience more vibrant health?
Shawn and Jade, clearly at the top of the list is avoiding antibiotics like the plague. I mean, again, if you have sepsis, if you have a gangrenous limb, by all means, take an antibiotic with my blessing. But really, for common cold, sinus infections, these kind of things, they're self-limited, they're mostly viral. You'll be sick a couple days longer, but it's vitally important in terms of keeping your immune system healthy that you try and avoid antibiotics as much as possible for you and your kids. I have a list of some 10 important questions to ask your healthcare professional if you've been prescribed an antibiotic that can help guide you in figuring out whether one is really necessary or not. And then some things that you can do if you have been prescribed an antibiotic, some advice on probiotics and so on. But the antibiotics are clearly key. There's some really simple things you can do. Open a window, let some microbes in. You know, we live in these hermetically sealed environments. So it's really important, if you want to have a healthy microbiome, yes, you can take a probiotic, but it's best to encounter microbes out there in nature as opposed to taking them in a form of a medication. So open a window, plant a garden, bring some plants inside your house. Soil microbes are really important. And remember that the microbes you're acquiring are only as good as the soil they're grown in. So you have to know where your food is coming from. If your food is assembled in some hermetically sealed factory where there are no microbes, guess what? You're not going to be getting any. So try and get food from a farmer's market or a community-supported agriculture, or food that's grown locally, food that has some dirt on it. If I buy vegetables and they don't have any dirt on them, I'm immediately suspicious. So that's another tip is, eat food with dirt on it, or at least food that's actually been grown in soil.
So
Getting
not
a
washing
dog
it
is
off?
a great way to rewild.
So we don't need to wash the fruit and vegetables off.
Well, it's tricky, and that's
Okay.
actually a great question, Jade, because, we worry about E. coli and all these different things. So you have to make sure you're getting your plants from a safe food source, number one, and that, you're not getting when you think about these problems with contamination, it's almost always some huge sort of factory farming operation. Right. It's much more common than your local organic farmer. It's pretty rare. But even so, you need to know where the food is coming from, and rinsing it with some water is not a bad idea. I'm not suggesting that you eat it with all the dirt on it, but again, you want to be mindful of the fact that the soil microbes are what you're trying to acquire into your digestive tract, a lot of them. And so you want to eat food that at least has been exposed to that at some point, and that where all the microbes haven't been killed off by a pesticide.
Right. Let's talk about the probiotics are popping right now. All right. There's commercials on the radio, on television, this guaranteeing people that they'll lose weight and that they're immediately, their stomach will get flatter. Just really, really corny marketing, which people spend a lot of money on that stuff. Yeah. But the thing is, these probiotics, these good floras, these friendly flora also need a place to stay. They need food. They need stuff, right? So let's talk a little bit about prebiotics. That part is missing from a lot of conversations, and resistant starch in particular.
So prebiotics are the most important thing because, as you point out, we use a prescription probiotic in my practice that's 900 billion microbes, 7 different strains, and I can give you 4 doses of that a day. But if you're not feeding those microbes the right stuff, they're dead in 20, 30 minutes. They're gone, and you're not going to get repopulation in your gut. You're not going to get recolonization, and you're not going to reap the health benefits. So if you're feeding your microbes donuts, not going to work. Not going to work at all. The main food for growing a good gut garden is indigestible plant fiber, foods that are high in inulin, things like artichokes, asparagus, leeks, onion, garlic, oats. These are all great foods, as well as all the leafy greens for your microbes. These prebiotic foods, fermented foods like sauerkraut, kimchi, also great, because in the fermentation process, not only are you getting fiber in something like sauerkraut from the cabbage, but in the fermentation process, you're producing a lot of lactobacillus, so it's sort of a twofer doing it that way. But again, the food is really key, the prebiotic food, and it's really food that's high in plant fiber, and that's a food that's the least represented in the American diet. If you look at leafy greens, that's less than 7% of the typical American's diet, and that should be 70%. So this idea that you can just take a probiotic and somehow undo the damage that your antibiotic has done and go on your merry way eating a donut is just junk science. I mean, that's magical thinking. Again, probiotics can be helpful in certain instances where people have had antibiotics or people have had travelers' diarrhea, viral illnesses, and so on, but only with a diet. On their own, they're really not going to create any meaningful change.
Wow. Thank you so much for clearing that up. And I think it's really important because you're just going to hear more and more about probiotics and how magical they could be. But the reality is, again, they have to have the environment for them to colonize. And that really starts with having the right nutrition. And in your book, you actually give specific nutrition protocols, recipes, things like that. Is really fascinating. And just overall, this book, I got it, guys, again, it is so important to have in your possession because this is where health really begins and ends. Like, she just broke it down from the very beginning of life, how it's this formatting disc for our immune system. Right. All right. We're talking about these microbes also have genes as well. And this communication and this amazing relationship since the beginning of humanity with these microbes, this symbiotic relationship and how it can get damaged with our life today. And one other thing I just want to mention really quickly before I ask you this final question, chlorinated water. It's another thing. So I did a water master class. And chlorine is one of those things. It's a very powerful antibiotic. All right. It is. It's great at killing stuff. Like, that's why, when you go to the public pool, it might be a good idea to have some in there. But, to the degree, people are peeing in there or whatever. But that's never mind. So here's the thing. Having that water in a swimming pool is one thing. Drinking it daily because it's coming through your faucet and you don't even think about it is a whole other thing. And so a lot of people
washing your body with it.
Yes.
Killing off all the skin microbes. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And chlorine is a problem because we know that chlorinating the water large scale, as happened in the 20th century, got rid of things like cholera. There were all these waterborne diseases, and there were outbreaks of cholera and things like that were, devastating communities. And so we have chlorine to thank for the fact that we have no cholera, but we also have chlorine to thank for the fact that our microbiomes are getting really devastated. I recommend a whole house water filter. There are a couple of recommendations for different brands on our website, and not just, a filter for your drinking water, but also a whole house chlorine filter, because what you're bathing with is really important too. Because as you said, Shawn, chlorine is a very potent antimicrobial.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. And we'll also, of course, point everybody to your website and everything in just a moment. But heads up, guys, again, the Brita filter, just a heads up, that's not going to cut it. Literally flip it over. It's made by Clorox. It says it removes the taste and smell of chlorine, but it doesn't actually remove chlorine. And to do that, a whole house system is going to be ideal. There's RO systems, all that kind of stuff, or even switching over and drinking reputable spring water, things like that. But just finding ways to really, with this whole conversation, I found that it's more, which is reality, is about removing the cause than trying to do something to improve things, which you've already provided that. And if you can, what's one more thing that we might want to target? I know you mentioned the resistant starch and probiotic. Is there anything else that we should be paying attention to?
I think think we need to be willing to be a little dirtier.
Yes.
This is, my 11-year-old loves this because she doesn't bathe and she's like, oh, mommy, I'm rewilding. But we're really obsessed with personal hygiene, with all the products. I mean, you look at what's in some of this stuff. And when you think about it, I mean, we take our hair, which is not particularly dirty, and we wash it with all these harsh cleansers. And then it's so dry, then we use a store-bought oil to put back in it. Where our body has produced all the natural oil that our hair needs. So we're sort of removing the natural stuff and then replacing it with a store-bought version. But we are really crazy when it comes to hygiene, particularly in this country. And we're bathing all the time and we're washing hair and then conditioner and pre-wash and post-wash. And the same with our clothes. I mean, I have an ongoing argument with my husband about the dishwasher because it doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, you have to wash the dishes pretty well to put them in the dishwasher so there's not residue on them. And then it's all this water and more detergent to wash them again. And I'm like, why don't we I use a dishwasher to dry the dishes in, quite frankly.
Yeah.
I hand wash them and just stack them in there to dry. And I'm like, it's too much. I mean, my plate is not covered in cow poo. And, if it were covered in cow poo, that might not be a bad idea to be getting some of that. That's for another show, maybe, in terms of stool transplants. But, the plate, I eat an orange. The plate is not filthy. I can rinse it in some water. It's okay. So we have this obsession with scouring our homes and our bodies, and there can't be any odor or any trace of anything. We all need to relax a little bit, get a little bit sweaty, have a little BO. It's okay. And again, like other things I mentioned, not only is it maybe not a bad idea, maybe there's an inverse relationship there to be found with how dirty you are and how healthy you are. Maybe there's a direct connection there. So I think that these personal care products that we're using are really making us quite ill sometimes. When you look at something like eczema, which is so common in the US now, more than 90% of people who have eczema are colonized with staph on their skin. And I'm quite convinced that a lot of that is because we're removing the natural balance and natural microbes that keep the staph in check on our skin by all these soaps and cleansers and perfume things. Because remember, alcohol in most of these personal care products is also a potent antimicrobial. I mean, that's what they used to keep hospitals clean before they were antibiotics, and they still do. Yeah. Alcohol swabs and everything else. So I think we need to all get a little dirty.
Oh, so good. So good. Dr. Chutkan, this has been enlightening and amazing and very, 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 very powerful.
Yeah.
I've got one final question for you, and I'd love to hear your answer on this. What is the model that you're here to set with the way that you are living your life personally?
I'm trying to get back to the cave a little bit, Shawn. My husband is resisting. He loves cities. He loves DC. He loves New York. I'm trying to, there's a show on BBC called The London Hospital, and it's about the first charity hospital in the East End of London in 1906. It's a fantastic series, but what's really fascinating to me as a physician is that fast forward 108 years, we're still pretty much stumbling around in the darkness in a lot of things, but we think we know, just like they thought they knew when they were using radiation to heal abscesses, and the abscess healed, but guess what? You got head and neck cancer and died. We're removing organs, you don't need your tonsils, you don't need your appendix, you don't need your uterus, you don't need your gallbladder. What? This sort of organ snatching era that we're in, these are vital organs that all play a role. And when something goes wrong with an organ, the solution shouldn't be to remove it. The solution should be to figure out what went wrong and fix it. So there's so many things in medicine today. I mean, don't get me wrong. Medicine, I'm proud to be a doctor. I think it's great that we can provide life-saving care. But there's so many things that we're doing on a large scale, C-sections, antibiotics, ripping out kids' tonsils, that are a bad idea. And we're seeing the repercussions from it. And we're going to continue to see repercussions for decades further. So the one thing, my best piece of medical advice is try and limit your interaction with the medical community as much as possible. If you're not feeling well, make yourself a little mushroom tea, maybe a green juice, lie down, get some rest, see how it goes. If you're deathly ill, you're seriously ill, go to the doctor. But try and be more of an advocate for your own health and be more of the architect of your own health, and eat some good food. Try and go it on your own, because the minute you start having a lot of interactions in the medical community, some not so good things can start to happen, the medications, the tests, and so on. So I find myself, I'm 25 years out from medical school now, and the longer I practice medicine, the less inclined I am to actually want to have interactions with the medical community. And quite frankly, Shawn, that makes me a bit sad, but I think that's kind of where we are in medicine. And so my message is one of do-it-yourself medicine and self-advocacy. And again, I'm not suggesting that if you're sick, you don't go to the doctor. But I think people understand what I'm saying, that we have to look for ways that we can treat ourselves and that we can heal ourselves. And quite frankly, shows like yours are such important sources of information for people, because it's giving people information that is not there in the medical community. And it's giving people information to help them be advocates for their own health. And it's so important. So I'm so grateful that you're doing that.
I am grateful too. Grateful for you. Yes, definitely. This is so refreshing, such a refreshing perspective. And I'm just very, very thankful that you had the audacity to put your time and energy into putting these books together and to sharing your gift. And so thank you so much for that. And if you can let everybody know, where can they connect with you and where can they find your books?
You can follow me on Twitter at Dr. Chutkan. You can check out our website, gutbliss, GUTBLISS.com. We have a new site that will be ready in a couple of weeks called the Gutbiome Institute, with a lot of great microbiome information. But Gut Bliss is where you can find me.
Fantastic. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. Everybody, thank you so much for tuning into the show. We're going to have all the links to connect with this amazing human being at themodelhealthshow.com. And this
her
is
microbiome.
This is a big shout out right here. Her tagline here is live dirty, eat clean.
There you go.
Live dirty, eat clean. How can you practice that art of getting a little dirty? Take your shoes off, get outside, play. And we're going to be talking more about all of these pieces, because we could do a whole show with her on just even one subject matter. This book is overflowing with information and insights. And I think that you probably walked away today with a few aha moments or 20. And it's really about, again, she said it very, 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 very perfectly, which is we want to take more self-care. Really take hold of that responsibility. This is your body and your life, and you're walking around in this amazing entity. You should learn some more about it. Be more educated when you do happen to find yourself in that hospital setting, so that you can make a more informed and educated decision. So, and also, of course, teaching this to our family, teaching this to our loved ones, to our children. We are really creating what our society is going to look like right now. And I think that she is definitely at the forefront of this shift in thinking. And it's seeing great results. Yeah. Unlike what she mentioned earlier, which is that how many have been cured? You were like, at least 50. Right. I don't know. Zero, because we're looking in the wrong place. Yeah. So everybody, thank you so much for tuning into the show. I appreciate you immensely. We've got so many amazing guests coming up, amazing shows, but none more important than this one. So make sure to take action on what you learned. Connect with Dr. Chutkan and make sure to grab her book. All right. Have an amazing day, and I'll talk with you soon.